Hi, I'm Bill Fegis, and welcome to our Business Transformation 101 podcast. In prior postings, we discussed what makes an A player, how to interview for A players, and creating a robust talent acquisition process. For today's podcast, we have with us Dr. Patrick Hopp, who is a partner with Leadership Development Worldwide, LLC. LDW is a team of business psychologists and consultants with exceptional insight into organizations, leaders, and teams, and a deep understanding of their clients' culture, values, and business priorities. Through decades of outstanding performance, they have built collaborative relationships and delivered results to their premier global client list. Patrick specializes in executive selection, coaching, and leadership development training, working with both individuals and teams to maximize their effectiveness and opportunities for success. For more than 15 years, he has worked with mid and senior level leaders in a variety of industries to help them select and build high-performing talent. His work draws heavily from research and best practices in organizational behavior and applied psychology, emphasizing self-awareness and learning through real-time feedback. I have the good fortune of working with Patrick and the LDW team for the past 20 plus years at multiple companies. LDW has been a key partner in supporting our leadership teams in acquiring, assessing, and developing talent. Patrick will provide his thoughts and insights on talent acquisition today, including key elements necessary to identify and hire A players, key things to avoid in your hiring processes, and finally, pros and cons of testing utilizing predictive index, Wonderlic, Myers-Briggs, and other testing protocols. Patrick, welcome to our podcast on talent acquisition, and thanks for taking the time to provide some insights to our listeners.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here. Good to be with you again. It's been a while since we had a chance to work together, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for inviting me.
Great. Well, once again, we appreciate you joining us, and hopefully the listeners will learn a lot from today's podcast. So let's jump right into it, and we'll start with identifying and hiring A players. How would you, based on your experience, define an A player, and what are the key elements in assessing whether a candidate is an A player?
Yeah, great question. So, you hear people talking about the importance of having A players on their team for obvious reasons, but it is probably not the case that people have a universal definition for what an A player is. So I would define an A player from a number of different perspectives. The most obvious one being that an A player needs to be someone who consistently performs well in the critical parts of the job that are required to have the business succeed, right? So, they're going to need to, hit their KPIs and deliverables in a really consistent way and do high quality work. That hopefully goes without saying. But then other things that may be a little less obvious is that I think A players are also people that not only bring a lot of value to the organization in the present, but also have the potential to add value in the future. So they're people that are likely to do well, not only in their current role, but can move in to new roles. And sometimes that gets a little tricky because you might not know exactly what that new role is going to look like, because business is dynamic, it's evolving, it's changing. You might have a good idea about what their manager or their boss does. So that's one sort of definition of what potential to succeed at the next level is. But given the fact that you could be in a completely different market or move into a different type of vertical, you want to have people on your team that have what we sometimes call the learning agility, to think quickly on their feet, to pick up new skills, apply the lessons that they've acquired in previous roles, and apply that in ways that allow them to get traction and help move the organization forward in sometimes some hard to predict ways. So that's the second thing that comes to mind. And then finally, I would say an A player is somebody who's able to add value not only in their own sort of immediate domain, whether that's in their role, the people they're leading, but they also help to kind of raise the bar for the people around them. So they push and challenge and support people to do their best work. And that has, the the added effect over time of just raising the whole capability of the organization.
Okay. Hey, in your experience, would you say, I mean, one of the concepts that I think is interesting about A players is that A players are defined in a context. So the classic example I use is I've seen this a million times through my career of and I'm not picking on the sales and marketing people, but how many times have you seen a great salesperson, be it an individual salesperson or a regional salesperson, get promoted to the VP of sales and marketing position. And the reason is, wow, they did such a great job as the regional sales manager or the sales engineer that they're the obvious choice for the VP of sales and marketing. And then, there's a complete disaster when that happens, because while they were an A player in the one role, being an A player in this other role isn't necessarily the same thing. I mean, is that a common situation you see?
Yeah, I think so. Probably for a couple different reasons. Yeah, I mean, the skill set required to be an A player at an individual contributor role isn't necessarily the same skill set that's required at a VP level, or a role that's obviously more about leading and motivating groups of people, and creating an overall vision. Some people are a lot better at execution, and they've got the sort of self-will and discipline to really apply themselves and push through obstacles, bring their A game for themselves, but they have a hard time sort of turning that off, taking a step back, allowing other people to sort of shine, and helping them to do their best. So it's a different skill set for sure. And, sometimes, those things generalize, better than others. It sort of depends on the role. I think about how often I see people sort of quickly plateau as an individual contributor versus being able to make the shift.
Yeah. Yeah. And this kind of fits with one of the concepts we talked about in an earlier posting was a scorecard to try and identify these key things about the role. And to your point, so obviously the scorecard for the VP of sales and marketing is going to look significantly different than that for the regional sales manager. And that kind of drives home the point of making sure you build that scorecard the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to make sure that you've got multiple people offering their input to those scorecards too, right? So, a manager or a senior level sort of leader obviously has one point of view on what it means to be an effective sort of regional sales head, for instance, an example you're using. But if you ask their direct reports, they might have a different point of view, right? So getting all the people that new hire is going to have to work with involved in the process of creating that scorecard becomes really important, because they're going to have to be effective with that whole range of stakeholders, not just the person they're reporting to.
Right. And you mentioned another point, which I think is an interesting one of you have an A player and an individual contributor role, and they kind of reach the top, but they're happy there. And my assumption is, hey, they can continue to be an A player just because they've topped out and are not looking to move forward doesn't necessarily mean they're no longer an A player.
Well, that's right. Although the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is, does that person then become, what we sometimes call a blocker, right? So, they might be an A player and doing everything that you ask them, and in some ways more in that position that they've been hired for. But, chances are if you've got other A players on the team, and some of those might be reporting to that person, then they're going to get frustrated because there's not going to be opportunities or career paths that open up. And so you might sort of make an argument for that it would be perhaps better for the long-term performance of the company to have a solid B or B plus player in that role, who's good at sort of managing others and equipping and coaching them to move up quickly through the ranks and take on other responsibility.
Great point. And hadn't thought about that, but blockers can be a big challenge sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, great. So thanks for that, Patrick. The second question we had for you was, are there common mistakes that organizations make in identifying and selecting A players? And how can our listeners avoid making these mistakes or minimizing them at the very least?
Yeah, I think we've, maybe already alluded to a couple of these. So, one sort of major category of mistakes that I would identify is that, people sometimes are just too short-sighted. They're too focused on the here and now and today, what they need, to achieve some short-term goal or objective within the organization, and they don't necessarily think about, okay, what's going to happen after we've accomplished that and check that off our box. Does this person that we're hiring and bringing in to help us with this problem of today, are they really going to be able to sustain adding value and help us accomplish our objectives and solve problems that are going to be more about the future or tomorrow? So I think it's really important to not sort of fall victim to the trap of wanting to jump right on the candidates that are going to help you accomplish these immediate goals, and then failing to think about what's going to happen down the line. So those are some of the things that immediately come to mind there. And then sometimes, that's easier said than done, because like I was alluding to before, you might not even know what some of those challenges are going to look like. I mean, if everybody knew where the market was going to be in, 3 to 5 years, they'd all be rich playing the stock market, right? So you have to sort of use your best intuition and think through, what those challenges might look like. And then, try to find people that have the versatility and potential to help you kind of go in these directions, even if some of them, aren't clearly defined. So being able to sort of navigate through ambiguity ends up being, I think, a pretty important quality for people. And then, sometimes managers end up really, I think, kind of trying to hire people that look too much like themselves. Mm-hmm. So, they bring in people that, they know they're going to get along with, that's obviously important, but they probably, assume that if someone were to be able to do the job in the way they did, they'd be successful at it. But that, sometimes overlooks the importance of having some diversity of thought and approach and background on your team. And then there may be more than one right way or good way to get some of these problems solved. And if you just focus too much on the way that they've been solved in the past, I think, again, it comes back to being a bit short-sighted.
Right. And that kind of hits back on your point too about getting the team involved in the definition of the scorecard, and I assume also getting the team involved in the interviewing process.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important predictor of success, making sure you get all the people you can involved, for a number of reasons. One, you get that diversity of thought, you get better buy-in right from the beginning. Those people then are more likely to be advocates for the person and help them succeed. They're going to expose them to, the things that they're going to need to access in the way of information and people as they get up to speed in the job. And they're going to be, champions for their cause versus, if they weren't involved in the hiring process, what you typically see is a lot of people kind of with a wait and see attitude. They're sitting back and wondering what this new guy or gal is going to be all about, and sort of being skeptical.
Okay. So let's, on this same question, let's drift a little over towards, the selection and specifically interviewing. Did a whole thing in one of the earlier posting about structured interviews, and certainly in my personal case, I found that to be a big lever that I didn't have before. I think I used the word seat of the pants as sort of used to be the way I interviewed people. And, hey, you interview for an hour and then you look at this and you go, hey, this is a huge investment we're making. And I'm only spending an hour doing due diligence on this individual. Can you talk a little about, you've done thousands of interviews, and you take a in-depth, probably 3 to 4 hour structured interview approach. And could you tell us a little about that and some of the things, that might help people get used to that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems shocking to a lot of people to find out that they're going to be interviewed for 3 to 4, sometimes 5 hours if it's a more senior level kind of president or CEO roles. They always wonder, what in the world are we going to talk about for that much time? And then they're usually pretty surprised by how quickly the time goes. There's a number of sort of key benefits for spending that much time with a person. But I think they kind of boil down to a couple of things. One is the more time you spend with someone, the more data you have. So I'll come back to that in a second. And then the other real benefit of these longer interviews is that after a while, people sort of forget that they're being interviewed, and they just sort of drop their guard and they start to be themselves.
Right.
People who are really good at sort of presenting and showing up for a job interview, and most top candidates are good at that. They sort of anticipate what the right answers are, and they've prepared for those things. And it's not that they're being, disingenuous. It's just that they're wanting to put their best foot forward because they know it's a job interview. And if they're interested in the job, you would hope and expect them to do that. But it's not necessarily the best predictor of who's going to show up when the actual job starts. Is it this person that really interviews well, or is it the person that's now on the payroll? So by taking the time to walk through a person's career, and the way that we recommend doing that is in chronological order. It allows you to collect a lot of data and have a complete context for how one role and experience leads to the next. And typically what you see is that there's some themes and patterns that start to emerge in that 3 or 4 hour long conversation. And it starts way back, even sometimes before they ever got their first job. You see some of these things appearing in their high school relationships or the activities they pursued in college, right? And then those things start to follow them throughout their different jobs that they've had. And when that's the case, when there are these sort of clear themes and patterns, it gives you a lot of confidence that those things are likely true about the person. And it's not just this snapshot or performance that you're witnessing in a sometimes as short as 30-minute job interview. I mean,
Right.
That's a pretty small amount of time with a limited amount of data to go by. But if you've got that longer sort of context and a whole kind of narrative to who the person is, right from early on in their life all the way through the present day, you'd be pretty assured that those themes and patterns are going to continue long after they are on your payroll. So those are I think the two main benefits: is collecting more data, having an opportunity to really see some of these things play out over a longer period of time in their career. And then, like I said, after an hour and a half, people start to become themselves. Their guard drops, and it starts to feel like a regular conversation. You're going to get less sort of a performance from the person, more of a genuine, authentic presentation.
Right. And I think you made an interesting point too, which I thought was something I picked up, was the whole thing about picking up patterns when you have this much data to go forward. So, okay, great. Final question is, LDW utilizes testing as part of its assessment process, and many companies utilize testing. I've used testing, and I'm a proponent of testing, but some people have concerns about using testing in the hiring process. Can you just provide some insight on the pros and cons of testing?
Sure. Yeah. I think, testing's usually a good idea, again, because you get more data. And in theory, it's more objective data. So the interview, in the way I described it, is great. I think that's probably where you should focus most of your attention and put a lot of the weight on your hiring decision. But the testing allows you to flesh out some of that data you get in the interview with some other specific, more so quote unquote objective um, pieces of information. So it helps you to begin to generate some what we might call hypotheses about who the person is before you ever sit down with them. So if you have their personality profile in front of you, chances are you can begin to come up with some ideas about how those things are likely relevant for the job that they're a candidate for and how those things might play themselves out. And then it helps you to be a bit more precise or surgical during your interview and to probe for those things and take less of a sort of a shotgun approach. And then, when you uncover some strengths that you see in that person that are also reflected in the with the personality or cognitive scores that you have, it gives you more confidence that those things are probably actually true and accurate. And it's not, again, just sort of a performance from the person that you're seeing. So those are some of the main benefits. And then I'd say one other that I didn't already mention is that, some of the things that those different assessments are designed to measure are pretty hard to probe for or interview for on the fly. Like, what are the person's sort of deeper motives or drives? What are their overall problem solving or intellectual skills? How do they go about thinking through problems? You can try to tease that out in an interview, but some of it's sort of hard because they're hidden deeper parts of what makes a person tick, and these things have a way of sort of helping you to bubble that up to the surface more quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I think a point you made, and certainly, in discussions I've had in the past with you about the testing data, is, to your point, it's just more data, and it shouldn't be viewed as a no-go piece of data, that it's part of the whole picture, and you're just trying to get a little more detail in that picture. And to your point, maybe even some confirmation of the interview versus the data.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. That's how they're best used. That's the intended purpose. But unfortunately, a lot of companies use different types of testing, but they don't actually train people properly on how to interpret the results. And whenever that's the case, I think you're more likely to see people putting too much weight on any one data point. Like the classic one, for instance, is on the problem solving questionnaires that are often administered, whether it's the Wonderlook or the Ravens or some of these others. If people don't really kind of understand how to interpret those in context, what you often see is people sort of getting latched on to a certain score and saying things like, well, we're not going to hire anyone unless they score at X.
Right.
And then they fail to kind of recognize that, well, there could be lots of reasons why people didn't happen to do well on that particular test that particular day. So I think that you have to be careful about that, not get too literal about interpreting the tests, not get too attached to any one specific number or score, and ideally sort of combine it with lots of other data points from your interview, other tests, and try to sort of triangulate all of that data into some, again, themes and patterns that tend to all sort of point in the same direction. Whenever that's the case, then I think it gives a person a lot more confidence in being able to make a hiring decision.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, Patrick, once again, we covered our 3 questions, and thanks for taking the time to join the podcast. We appreciate your insights. If people want to learn more about Patrick and LDW, they can go to the LDW website at www.ldw-w.com. Any feedback or questions can be sent to me via the LinkedIn Business Transformation 101 postings, and I'll get any questions for Patrick back to him. So thanks to all of our listeners today. Stay safe out there, And please join us each Wednesday for a new volume of Business Transformation 101. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Bill. Good to be here.